Tom Screen here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have Tracy Gunn. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. You'll probably learn a lot about me from the episode, but I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. I just love to create something from nothing. But then COVID and burnout and all of those things happened. And so I kind of closed up shop, sold, retired semi, and then got this passion bug about helping people sell their businesses and prepare for their exit, because there was a time where my business was not sellable and it really broke my heart. And I don't want anybody else to go through that. So that's pretty much it.
The reason I thought, I said to you prior to recording that I love this topic, and the reason is that I think that it's spoken about so infrequently. So yeah. I speak about loads of different business topics on the podcast. I think I've done, over 170 episodes now, and only one of them has been about this particular topic. So that I think even that I think is more than normal because most people just don't talk about it. They go into business and they don't necessarily think about their exit.
Correct.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's entirely accurate. And most business owners, right? You're busy starting it, you're busy building it, and you might have a long-term goal in mind about a number you want to hit, or I want to have this many, locations, or I want to have this many clients, but most business owners are not thinking at all about building something that can sell and how to get themselves out of it. And profit from it. Because most of us start our businesses and think, well, someday it'll pay me back, right? And for most of us, that's when we exit, we hope. And that's how we plan to retire. And that is really pretty rare. I mean, the statistics for how many businesses actually sell is between 10 and 20%, which is not great. I do think that it can change. And I do think for me, the sounding alarm was I was taking a class and they were talking about that in the next 5 to 10 years, all the baby boomers were going to retire. And that's about 12 million businesses in the US. I don't know about the UK, but, and if those businesses went the way that my business was going to go, they would just disappear from the economy. And in our country, small businesses employ so much of our population. I mean, I call them the superheroes. They really make our economy work. And if 12 million of them disappeared, and this is before COVID, I learned about this, and COVID has done its own havoc. So yeah, I think it will start to be talked about more, but exactly right. I'm trying to sound the alarm bell that people can prepare and fix it. It's not too late.
Would you like to share your story regarding how you went to sell your business and couldn't?
Sure. So business has always kind of been my saving grace. I had a really hard time period in my life and my family. And whereas most people might mope or feel bad for themselves, I have a tendency to make lemonade and do something. And so I started my first business in that chaos. And then as things happened in my life with my family and more things happened, I created more businesses to the point where I had, in 2019, I had 4 businesses running and I was managing them all, which is a long day. And I didn't set out to do that to myself. I don't think anybody does. I think I just thought, I could do this, and then I could do this, and I'll rise to the challenge. And that's what we do, right? It's like the frog in the boiling water. We just acclimate as we go. And my daughter had a baby, and I became a grandma. Yay, grandma! And I was like, I couldn't leave. I couldn't be close. I'm missing it. And I was working 16, 17-hour days. And I just thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. I had 42 staff between my businesses. and I just was done. So I'll try to cut to the chase. But so basically, I called my broker friend, local, and I was like, I want to sell everything. And so he's like, all right, let's take a look, right? Which is scary. It's so scary. I don't know if anybody out there can relate to that, but like, just think about exposing your, like, all your vulnerabilities to like some guy who's judging you. And that's his job. And so he took a look at it, and he was like, my biggest one, the one that was making the most money, he said, it's not worth anything. And I would, and I was like, what do you mean it's not worth? I mean, we were probably bringing in 800,000 a year at that time in sales. So, I mean, there was value there. We had cash flow, we had customers, what do you mean it's not worth anything? And he just said, it's not, but he didn't really give me any direction. He just kind of like he just said it, and that was it. And so I cried a little bit, I'll be honest. And kind of like took a little while to just process that, and still worked, right? Still kept going like all business owners do. And I was like, well, I could quit. I could liquidate everything, right? Just walk away. Lots of people encouraged me to do that. I could just fix it. I could try to figure out how to fix it, salvage it, or I could just keep doing what I'm doing, right? You have three options. And I just was like, you know what? I'm pretty smart. The internet's pretty vast. I'll try to figure it out. And so I started to look at, okay, if you remove me from the piece, how do I fix this, right? How can I just get me out of it entirely? Because I thought, all right, if I'm not there and it doesn't fall apart, there's something that I could transfer, right? And so that's kind of what I did. I went on this journey. I said, I could do anything for 3 months. So I just set my tone, like, I'm going to do this for 3 months. I'm going to try everything I can to improve my valuation. I hired someone to help me with my books. And I installed an inventory system. I did all these things, right, to solidify the business, that while you're doing it all, you maybe don't have the time to even consider or implement. But I just I shifted and made that my priority. And funnily enough, I mean, my happy ending is that I found a buyer in 3 months. Like, yay, right? For one, not all, but one.
That is, I love the happy ending. There are a couple of
Yeah.
things that I thought are worth following up on.
Okay.
Immediately from regarding the broker and what comments were about the fact that it's not worth anything. From the fact that you have more expertise now, do you disagree with that opinion?
I disagree on one level, because he really only looked at it through a narrow lens, right? He looked at it, profit and loss sheet, balance sheet, that's it. He didn't look at what was there. He didn't look at systemization. He didn't look at any tech. He didn't look at people, right, that would continue carrying it on. He looked just bare bones. Was your profit? And it was a relatively new business. It had a couple of years, so the profits weren't great because you have your startup costs and things. And this is pre-COVID, mind you. But he looked with a very narrow lens. But I will say, not to diss brokers in any way, but every state in America is different. So in our state, anybody can sell a business. There's not like a training or a certification. The reason in our state, real estate brokers are the ones who sell businesses. Usually, and the only caveat there is that they have to be the ones to sell if there's real estate involved, right? Which makes sense. But most of them, this is not their gig, right? This is not what they're doing all the time. They're not looking, like, if they're looking at houses all the time, they could tell you off the top of their head exactly what it's worth, right? And they could look at all the different ways to value it. But in a business, unless they're really good at selling businesses, they're not business owners themselves, so they don't know all the pieces and what goes into it. And so I think he was right. Yes, when he looked at just through his narrow lens, he was right. On paper, it didn't look great. But I do think, and my experience is, and what I share with my customers or my clients is, or other business owners, is that you're more than that number, because that number is so subjective. right? So I think he was right to some degree. But I think if he had the tools to be able to help me, I think he would have. He's a nice man, right? We're still friendly. He still shops at my candy store. But I think he's just not equipped to help somebody in that position. It's just not what he does. And again, that's something that we're working with brokers to help do.
So, and just for clarification, what businesses are you in now and which one did you sell?
So I had a big Irish bar restaurant that I found a buyer for, and we were supposed to sign the week they closed us down for COVID. So it did not sell, but we had gotten through everything except COVID happened. So I still call it a success. And I'm happy for him, my buyer, because he would have been in a lot of trouble if he had given me his life savings, because he dreamed to own a bar and restaurant. And he would have gotten no help from our government, and he would have been sunk. I mean, we were closed for 4 months after that. So yeah, I mean, the happy part is the hardest part often is just finding the buyer, right? And having somebody be interested in it. So yeah, so I kept that one longer after, I should say, I kept that one after COVID, and we closed that one because we couldn't operate. And then I shut down another restaurant a year later, and then I have my candy store, one of them, not two. And then we have e-com, and then I have my business here.
Sounds like you're still quite busy.
I can't help it. It's the business owner way, right? But it's good things.
I love it. And regarding the things that you did to change from a business which someone gave you the view that it wasn't worth anything to when you actually went to sell, what are the things, the main sort of things that you changed, which most other businesses do?
Okay, so I mean, what I did, again, I approached it from my own naivete, right? So I just kind of did the things that moved the dial for me. And every business is different, but yet the same, right? So I hired someone to help me with my books, because the profitability was better than it had looked. It just, I hadn't had somebody go in and do a deep dive into, because I was doing all my books too, right? So add accountant to my jobs too. So she went in and cleaned up everything. Like I had things posted in the wrong place, and you're just in the motion. You're not always seeing how everything affects everything else, right? So I paid somebody to help me with that. So that was a huge thing for me. And then I took a class about valuing, like what brings the value, right? Most of the valuation will come from your profitability. But there are other factors that get involved when you have your multiple. So there you are, right? So I installed an inventory system for my alcohol, which I didn't have before. And I learned somebody was stealing from me a lot, right? So all of a sudden now my profitability, those next 3 months went way higher. Why? Because someone wasn't giving away all my alcohol or stealing from the till, right? But so that was one of the things I did. I came up with a ordering system, and I put my kitchen manager in charge of that. I still oversaw it, and I had a boundaries set up, but that she completely on her own was responsible for inventory, but also ordering. So that was another thing off my plate. So like you really focus on systems, right? That somebody else can do. You remove yourself. You still can be over the business or working on the business, but you do not want to be in the business, because you don't go with the business unless you're planning a big earn out, which means you're going to stay on with the new owner for a while. You do not want any of your roles to be done in the business. Supervising, yes. Like overseeing, yes. So, I hired an accountant, I put in inventory systems, I delegated a lot of my responsibilities. I set up customer loyalty program and had email lists where I could contact, so I could show how I was getting my sales, how I can consistently get my sales and keep it growing. So that was another systemization I put in place. And again, some tech was involved in that, and some was delegating to staff. So any kind of thing you can put in place to remove yourself and have consistency, standard operating procedures, having them and using them often are two different things, right? So any of those things are going to solidify your business and make it way more attractive to a buyer.
In terms of value,
Mhm.
I suppose just a knowledge question from me,
Sure.
because how a business looks from the financials,
Mhm.
I suppose it's quite difficult to know how much you're involved in that business.
Correct.
So how does, let's say, a buyer know how much you're doing versus not doing as the owner, the current owner of that business?
Mhm. Usually it's a conversation. I always encourage, I know a lot of people don't encourage, but I encourage my sellers to talk to the buyer. It is so important because you can usually get all of your wants met if you're honest and upfront about that. And often the buyer will give you exactly what you're asking, because if you're flexible and you're honest and forthcoming, right? I would say, yes, that they're going to look at the valuation, but as they do due diligence and they look what systemizations are in place, asked to see the standard operating procedure, asked to see a chart of the key staff, who's responsible for what. That will clearly show you who's doing what, how much do they cost? Are they doing a good job? Because inevitably you want to buy a business that's working, that's profitable, but one that you can also grow, right? Most of us are not looking to buy a business to keep it as it is. We see an opportunity. So if it doesn't have all the pieces, like eventually my bar had a lot of things that moved the dial for me in value, and my buyer was a customer who was sitting at the bar regularly, um, seeing all of the things improve, seeing more people in the bar, seeing better staff, seeing the systemizations kind of coming through. And so he could see that, and he could see me not being such a frenetic, crazy owner who was involved in everything. He could see that, right?
So would your position be that if the financials are good, then
Mhm.
that is what will determine the interest from the buyer? But once they have the conversation of how much you're doing as an owner, that will kill the deal, essentially.
It could. But the thing is, some of those things can easily be fixed. Sometimes the owner's the problem. Sometimes the owner's in the way of, right? Whether they've lost interest. I think I have a customer or a client who is, he's got other businesses, and this other one, which was his first one, he's kind of just lost the passion. So it's just on the slow decline, but it's still a good business, right? So the owner in that, and he's in it a little bit, but he's kind of neglected it. And so it's not necessarily a deal kill. Um, I think I think everything's different. I think there's a buyer for every business. There are some people out there that are just scooping up certain kinds of businesses to add on to what they already have. Like, we'll give an example. I still own my brick and mortar, my e-com candy store. And one of my goals is to buy other candy stores, right, for fulfillment, but also because I think I want their legacy to continue. There's a little nostalgia there for me, but having 10 candy stores instead of one candy store, now my multiple is very different. And all I did was add on to what I already have, right? So there's a lot of different ways, and it really depends on the buyer. If the buyer doesn't want to be involved at all, that would kill that deal, right? But if the buyer wanted to be the guy sitting at the end of the bar, chatting with everybody, like in my restaurant, explanation or example, that would work for him. And that's exactly what he planned to do. He just wanted to be there. He loved being there. He loved the atmosphere and he wanted to own it. So I think it really depends on the goal of the buyer. And I do think there's plenty of wiggle room with whether it's earn outs, earn ins. There's all kinds of ways you can frame it if both the buyer and seller are open to being creative, which saves a lot of deals.
And by earn-outs, earn-ins, is that coming back to staying on after a business is sold for a certain period of time?
Yeah. So I had a business recently who he was a client who came to our virtual event, and he didn't need our services. He had been in business for 52 years, which is like, wow. And he has had a whole bunch of pieces to his business, and he just already knew he wanted to validate, which is why he came to the class, but he wanted to carve off parts of it. But he knew, because he was so integral in everything over 52 years. I mean, just think of the things he knows about that business. He already knew that he'd have an earn out of 5 years. And as to earn in, I mean, so I use that from the perspective that people are earning in as they're working towards ownership. So that sometimes can shift the financial piece, which is often a struggle for a buyer. Instead of tying up all their money, they earn in and they do it over time, and they keep the owner on, and it just ensures an easy handing off of the business, right? And it really depends on the seller and the buyer. A seller who's just burnt out and done probably doesn't want to plan 5 years to earn out. They just want it now. It's going to be a different sale.
You mentioned you did a class in how to value a business.
Mm-hmm.
When someone says, "What's my business worth?"
Mm-hmm.
It's probably quite a complex question, but if you're able to give a simple answer, what do you typically say?
So the good news is we have like a really simple worksheet, because it is intimidating, right? And ultimately, your business is worth what somebody's willing to pay. My house doubled in value this past year only because someone's willing to pay double. Nothing else really changed, right? We built a tree house. I shouldn't say nothing else changed. That's what the picture is. But my point is that it's because people are willing to pay that, right? And right now is a great time to sell because there's a lot of money out there looking for a place to go and land, and interest rates are really low. So when someone comes and says, "What's my value?" right? We give a brief overview. Now, generally speaking, we're dealing with small business owners under $5 million a year in sales, and that have staff. Solopreneur is a whole different animal, and you can sell if you're a solopreneur, but you definitely have to do the work to get yourself out of it and replace yourself. So there's something it takes a little time, but it's doable. So don't give up, solopreneurs. But so what we normally do is we give the brief overview of EBITDA versus SDE, right? If you are under, I would say, $4 million in sales a year, and you are involved in the business, you're going to want to go with the SDE, okay, which is your seller's discretionary earnings. And then you're going to take your profit, you're going to add back in, so make the profit more for any kind of owner perks that we give ourselves as owners. So let's say you have a Lexus that it's paying for, right? The value of that for the year you can put back into the business, or your lease, or your cell phone, or let's just say you took a company retreat to Paris, or that all can get added back in to your bottom line. So that makes the profitability higher, which is great. We love that. And then if you're, let's just say me, I was managing, accountant, I was inventory, I was, HR, I was everything. You have to account for removing you. and replace yourself. So let's just say let's just say I was only doing the books in the business and I wasn't doing anything else. And the books took about 5 hours a week. So you have to deduct from your profit what you'd have to pay somebody to replace your role. Okay. Not what you're worth, right? Let's just say you're paying yourself 200,000 because you're worth that. But what you're doing actually in the business, and I don't mean the owning and the running, I mean the nuts and bolts of the business, you need to replace that so that can continue. So that part goes off of the profit. And so when you have those numbers, you get kind of this general idea of what it is. Now, the other piece of this is your multiple. Let me quick explain EBITDA. EBITDA is if it's professionally managed, so owner's not involved at all. You have like a full C-suite, everybody's jobs taken care of. The owner's not actively involved, and you have probably over 4 million in sales. You're going to use EBITDA, and your multiples are going to be higher. So when we talk about the multiple, again, it's generally, if you're SDE between 1 and 4, again, these are all generalities. And then if you're doing EBITDA, it could go as high as 10 or 20. It really depends. And we have like a little calculator we created, like a sellability scale or percentage, like your score of what you could sell and what your multiple might be. But as an SDE, a safe guesstimate is 1 to 1.5 of your total number that you wound up with. I don't know if that's confusing. And then if you're doing EBITDA, you're going to go higher and you're going to find what things have been selling for in your industry, because it's really also industry related. Buying a newspaper that's on the decline versus an e-com store, different industries, one's kind of on the decline, one's definitely on the increase, right? So your multiple is going to be a little bit different. And so I like to have my sellers be reasonable, because it's never what they think it's worth. It's always less the first time they do it.
I think there's an old joke or something, which is every business owner thinks their business is worth $1 million or £1 million. Have you found that to be true?
Totally. And that's a little bit of, again, I, when my broker told me it was worth nothing, that was devastating. I didn't think it was worth $1 million, but I thought it was worth something. And I thought it was worth selling. But yes, exactly. Like, I think we just have this, I think as the business owners, we're super optimistic about everything, about what we can do and how high we can go and all the things we can, implement. And so that's just carried over into our value. And I think there are things, the great part of this, the silver lining in all this is once they get a valuation, it's just like it was for me. It's a starting valuation. It's where you start to get a sense of where you are. And then you have choices to make, right? Whether you want to continue, whether you want to improve. I have a gentleman who is an electrician, and we were talking, he wants to sell in the next couple of years. And he's still very involved in the business. But one of my thoughts to him, he was trying to talk about like how to maximizing, and he owns the property. So he's going to carve out his property so he still has income. And he was looking at other businesses that are like his that he could maybe scoop up and bring into the fold so that he could grow over the next 2 years, right? Because he's kind of at retirement age, but he's tired. But if he's going to get the big exit he hopes for, he's got to do something to like bump it up a little bit, which are great. So there's a lot of things you can do to increase the multiple, increase the value, increase your profitability. And it's just deciding how willing you are to spend time and money to do those things.
Great answer.
Thank you.
I'm looking at some of the questions that I should be asking, which I checked out on the profile prior, and there's a couple which I guess one that I want to to ask you about before I move on is, let's say someone who likes the idea of selling their business, but they're kind of not even at step one. What do you
Right.
encourage them to do first?
Well, we do our virtual class because I find, like you mentioned at the beginning, nobody talks about this. It's like no man's land, right? Um, and everybody thinks their business is different than everybody else's, right? Because it's unique to them. And it might have some quirks and things that are different, but in general, most businesses are the same, right? Sales in, money out. Like, I mean, right? Somebody running everything, no matter what it is. And so, yeah, I think the first thing to do is to really like to not get frustrated and get overwhelmed. I think it's a vulnerable place to be. It's a vulnerable place to be because you're lost. Nobody really talks about it. You're in no man's land. It's like getting dropped on a deserted island and you're trying to figure out, and you were just in the place where you were running everything and you knew everything, and now you don't know anything about something you own. So we really try to make it fun and simple and in layman's terms without getting fancy and techy, because really it's personal. And so step one, I would say, is start to learn, understand. Anyone's welcome to come to our class, but we make it really easy to get in, and we give you worksheets that help you figure that out. But step one, I would say, it sounds scary, but it's not, is do an exit strategy. Think, and all that is think about who might be my buyers, what do I want, how long do I want it to take, how much do I really want for my business, right? What am I willing to settle for? Like one of the simple questions, like, okay, are you willing to own or finance? And are you willing to do it over 10 years and all of that? Because being creative like that and being flexible like that, it also helps you tax wise, but it also allows for a greater spectrum of buyers could be the potential buyer, right? If you want all cash upfront right away, that's going to be a pretty slim basket. We want a big basket to be looking at your business. And the exit strategy is fun, I think. I think the word strategy scares people, so we've been trying to change it to plan. And it's just about dreaming big. Like when you started your business, you dreamed of all the things it could do, all the ways you would do it, where it could go, how it would work. Same thing. You're just doing that on the opposite end, and you've already built the business. You've done the hard part. This is a little bit of like pie in the sky. Let's dream big. And then once you have that in place, then you can do the valuation, a self-valuation, or call a broker. They'll do it for free, or there's tons of things online that will do it for you, just to know where you are, right? And then think about what we do in our class, and we encourage people to do, is we have a little checklist, like, or you can do a buyer's checklist of what are buyers looking for, but you also can do a seller's checklist of like, how am I going to hand this over? What would tank it? What is in the way of me handing it over? If I went on vacation for 6 months, would it fall apart? Why? Fix those things and figure out what the order of importance is, and either delegate, hire, train, tech. There's things to do there, right? But I would say first is just decide what it is you want. And it just takes a little dreaming. You take a half hour, you write some things down. I think when we call it, the exit strategy, it seems very scary and overwhelming. And it honestly, I wish that everybody would have this from the beginning. We should have it from the beginning, right? You're starting here. This is what you're building. There should be an end goal, something you're aiming for, and how you want it to go. Whether you're going to, build this business, you're going to sell it to your employees, which is an option. Whether you're going to build something that's going to get scooped up by a big conglomerate, whether you're going to build something and add on other businesses you buy to make this chain to sell, or whether you just want it to be a family legacy. I mean, there should be an end plan. And it changes, right? You have a business plan, it's a working plan. It's always changing. it's not something you do just to go to the bank. It should be something that you're constantly every year evaluating, or every 3 months or 6 months or whatever that looks like, because you never, how many of us, right, can relate to COVID happening and thinking, gosh, now what? How many of us had to pivot in some way? One of my restaurants did 5 ghost kitchens, because we didn't have the traffic in the store, but I wanted them to be able to work, right? So we changed our model. We changed what kind of food we were putting out. We went from a full service restaurant to a counter service restaurant. That changed my waitresses' income, right? How instead of being dependent on tips, they were getting minimum wage plus tips, because a lot of times they were doing DoorDash. So, like everything, we have to pivot and we learn as we go. And it's just this next part of pivoting. Okay, well, I want to go here. I want to move to see my grandson. I want to be completely out of the business in 2 years. I'm willing to finance it as long as, I feel solid about it. And I don't mind staying for 3 months to help them figure it out. That's an easy enough thing, right? And I want 100,000. However that is, right? It's just having a list and have them be realistic. Because then when you do your valuation, it kind of grounds you a little bit. And then the seller's checklist helps you figure out what are the pieces you should fix, and kind of give you a roadmap to how to get there. Hopefully that wasn't too long-winded, but that's kind of our process. And that's what I did for myself.
Plenty of good stuff in there, so not long-winded at all.
Good.
You did mention about the think about who your buyer might be, and I mean it's again probably one of those questions where it's complex, and I'm asking you to simplify it. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
But if it is the case that someone says, okay, who's my buyer going to be? How, if they weren't to know, let's say for a second, what advice would you give them?
That's a great question. I would say to really consider, who do you come in contact with on a regular basis, right? I would say, who are your suppliers? Who do you sell to? Because a lot of businesses are buying in their vertical. So that's number one. I would say your customers are usually your biggest fans. So you never know. You kind of can let that get out there. I would say, look at your staff. Let's just say that you wanted to be creative and say, okay, I'm going to fix this business. I'm going to get it to the value I want. And Joe is really good. Like, he's a go-getter. I love having him here. I want him to stay after I'm gone. Maybe I make Joe an offer and I teach him, and he's going to pay me. And maybe that's something Joe's mentioned, right? Or maybe your kids that have been working all along, all aside you, right? Or alongside you. Or, it could be, I'm in a number of buying groups. There's a lot of people out there buying things you wouldn't think they'd be buying, right? There's one lady who's buying auto repair places. I think she has 100 of them. She just keeps buying them, right? She just people are putting it out there, but what she's doing is she's building a chain. She's systematizing. She's bringing all of the process and the HR and all of the expenses to one central place, right? Like HR and payroll and all that stuff. She's centralizing, she's standardizing, and she's building herself like a big chain by buying from people that maybe were just ready to retire, which is an interesting model. So you just don't know. You don't know. And again, because there's so many, I think as more businesses are for sale, and that statistic we talked about of that 10 to 20% has got to change. Like, it's got to. And so I think the discussions will change. I think the creativity about the deals will change, and who you're looking to buy. And I think more and more businesses will start to think with the end in mind. It's just a shift, right? And sometimes life throws us a curveball and makes us shift really fast, like COVID. And then others, come over time, and I think like we talked about the small businesses, the baby boomers that are going to retire. That's just the boomers. That's 12 million in the US. That's not anybody else. That's not any other people who are trying to sell. So that's got to change. And I think there'll be a lot of creativity about how we handle that. And I think people will start to expand their minds about what retirement looks like. In the past, it was like, you buy it, you give me all the money, I walk away, we're done. But that's not necessarily how it has to go, right? Or someone buys it because they want to work in it. That's not necessarily how it's going. So there's just so many options, and it can be structured so interestingly. And this is why I encourage buyers and sellers to talk, because I think you both can get there, right? Listen, Tom, if I was going to buy your business, okay, and your number was, let's just say it was $1 million, because everyone thinks their business is worth $1 million. But you are willing to wait, and you do a deferred down payment, and you'd like work with me for a month, and like you would get everything ready, and I'd have some requirements about like, okay, I want this, this, and this before we close. And then you're willing to do a balloon payment in 5 years, and we're going to pay you monthly this, and we're going to pay you 4%. But I'm going to give you your full asking price because you're willing to give me what I want, which is time, right? Flexibility, creativity. And so I think when the buyer and seller both are willing to be open without being scared, because I think fear gets in there, right? Well, what if they tank my business? Well, I mean, if they stop paying you, you get the business back. I mean, so and you can always write as part of the deal some protection, but nobody buys a business to tank it. Nobody. Gosh, it's hard enough to start a business, Often people are buying businesses because they're more guaranteed, 90% of small businesses fail, right? If you've lasted, let's say, like my friend Don, 52 years, the likelihood that that business is going to fail is pretty small, provided that you sell to somebody who's competent, and the seller's pretty smart. They know.
Those types of creative deals that you're referring to, are those options contracts?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not as familiar with options because we're dealing with smaller companies, but I think options to me, and maybe it could be a American versus UK terminology, but options for us is more stock, going public or selling off the shares, which is a possibility, right? That's still an option. I have a client who is selling to their employees. They already know they are. So they're setting things up and figuring out how to do that, right? And that's one of the options, right? If they're going to sell to all of them, do they make one big corporation, or do they sell off shares with a corporate? It's hard to know. And it's really up to them to figure out how they'd like to do it. And I would definitely say hire a lawyer to help you navigate that, and a CPA to kind of look at the tax advantages and disadvantages. Every state is different. Every country is different. I mean, there are ramifications for our choices, right? Having a corporation in a state that doesn't have income tax versus having a corporation in, let's say, where I'm from, New York, where there's all kinds of taxes, right? Different. So it really, it takes some due diligence, but as you go through the process, every time you solve a question, a new one presents itself. But that, again, that's kind of what's exciting about being a business owner, I think, is the solving the problem and figuring it out.
Well, I think you definitely, shall we say, act out that particular example, because you seem to be always solving problems.
Oh yes, I love it. Keeps my brain sharp.
I bet it does. What are your goals, Tracy?
Let's see. I have a lot of goals. I want to have more time with my grandchildren, which is exciting, which is what started all this, right? So grandchildren change everything, I think. I don't know that I'll ever slow down. I don't know that I'll ever not have businesses, because I love them. And I love business. I just love the creativeness, and it's like an art. I love it. And I do think my big goal for right now is really kind of like we talked about, sounding that alarm for owners. Again, it comes from my own pain, but it's unnecessary, right? If I had thought about that, or I had even known to think about it, I would have been more prepared, right? So sounding that alarm, I'll tell you, my favorite part of every day is when I get on we book a call and we chat about their business and why they want to sell, and to see if we're a good fit or not. And I just love hearing from all these business owners what they've done, how long they've had it, why they did it, why they want to sell, because it's different every time. Every time. One never worked in the business, and he has always, it's been his side hustle, and he just has a corporate job. He got a big promotion, and so he doesn't want to do it anymore. But other ones started from scratch and built it over 52 years. I mean, some of it's just a passion project, then they've grown, they fell into it, other inherited it. I mean, there's so many stories, and I don't know, it's just amazing to me how many stories there are, and they're all so different and fascinating. So my big goal is to help a lot of them. I probably can't help all of them, because I am, one person. We try to keep it kind of personal, but we're working on it. But yeah, I want to see all these businesses sell, because I think business owners have worked really hard and deserve it. And if I could help that happen, mission accomplished.
Do you think that one day you will be able to sell your business about selling businesses?
Wouldn't that be funny? Probably. You never know. Or maybe I'll just, this is one of our lines in our course. We tell our clients is that we'll help you get there, right? And get it to be sellable, but you'll only sell it if you want to, because maybe at that point it's so easy for you, because you've removed yourself and all the stress and all the things that made you want to sell. Maybe you'll just keep it and profit from it finally, which is what our goal is always from the start, right? We give to it like our children. We raise them up, and then we hope they're going to give back to us, usually with grandchildren, and hopefully taking care of us when we're old. But right, the idea of that. And so, hopefully we help a lot of people get their businesses ready to sell, so that they're ready when they're ready, if they ever are. But maybe a lot of them just keep it and then pass that on, right? Because they've created something that is independent and working smoothly and efficiently. It
Is there
could
anything
happen.
that I should have asked you about today?
Oh, I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
Let me think. I don't think so. I do think, I don't think we talked about growth and things like that, but I think that's all involved with, where they are, right? If they're willing to take 2 years to work themselves out of it, they really should have a plan of growing over those 2 years to show, right, that momentum is continuing. And one of the ways you do that with marketing, one of our questions on our sellers checklist is, have you made a new offer in the last year? People who are tired and burnt out are not usually thinking about, they're thinking about surviving usually. They're not always thinking about the next offer to expand and grow. And that's not bad, but it's something that they easily could do. And there's always something new or something that worked before, but that's kind of like worn, it's, done its time, but that you can refresh and reintroduce. But it just shows this intention and this plan of growth, right? And that's involves marketing and sales and things like that. So, but other than that, I think you did an amazing job.
Thank you. I was going to say that I know that your expertise is probably beyond just selling businesses because of the amount of business you do, but it's nice to get your expertise in an area that's not being talked about. So if someone does want to learn more, where do they find you?
Well, we have a website. You can actually watch a little mini webinar, kind of explains the basics of preparing your business for sale. It's called howtoexityourbusiness.com. We also have a virtual event that we hold once a month, and you can come and we do it for like 4 hours, all different business owners from all different niches, and we talk about those same things, but we answer questions and kind of, it's amazing what you learn in a group, right? The thing, the beauty salon and the auto repair often have a thing that's similar that they both were wondering about. So we do that once a month, and that kind of exposes us to more people and gives people the opportunity to spend a little more time, get a little more questions answered, and then to apply to work with us if they think it's a good fit, and then if we think it's a good fit.
Tracy Gunn, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was amazing. I appreciate it so much.